My name's Mike Young. I'm Head of News at Broadcast Revolution, and our guests today are Kaz McBride, who is Guest Production Manager at FlightStory. That's the home of, among other things, Diary of a CEO. Kaz was previously producing Capital Breakfast. And drumroll, change to the advertised casting, Al Riddell is with us. Thank you, Al. He's Head of Factual Podcasts at Global, and that, of course, is the home of the news agents and many other things besides that we'll be hearing about today. Al was previously a BBC World Service podcast and broadcast producer. I think that's my question to both of you, really. Kaz, first, if I may. You've made the switch from broadcast to podcast. How does that feel?
It feels less scary now.
You're not live.
Yeah, not live. But as well, I think just as we continue to grow and build our community, I see how invested they are in our shows and in what we're trying to build. And although it was a very scary move, because it's a totally different landscape, and long gone are the days of your standard in and out, you know what you're doing, you have your script, like everything changes constantly. It's reactiveness, it's everything. So it feels great. I'm really happy with where we are, and I just know this future for all of us in this game is really exciting.
You've done the same thing, made that move within the BBC first, from broadcast to podcast, and now outside of the BBC. Why that switch from broadcast to podcast for you?
Well, no regrets here. I think I got hooked on the adrenaline as a news producer, and the late deadlines and the just sheer number of people you talk to on a daily basis, the amount you learn on a daily basis. That was a bit of an addiction. But then when I sort of side hustled in podcasting, I realised that I could do the same thing but have more creative control and be able to reach more people more directly and have even more loyal listeners than even in broadcast. So I made the transition to World Service podcasts, working across their narrative series and output. And then things have just been bananas, haven't they, in the podcast landscape? It's just been growing and growing, expanding. I arrived at Global at a time when I think it's fair to say podcasts were seen as a bit of a bolt-on in the company. The podcast unit was sort of a Silicon Valley startup within the company. And now, a few years later, it's a core area of the business that's absolutely vital to serving our audiences and hitting our business objectives. So it's been so rewarding, and the adrenaline is still there because we're producing so many podcasts, which is scary.
And although you aren't necessarily live, I mean, both of you have the capacity to, with very little turnaround, put out an emergency latest edition of almost any podcast that you create. You have that control. It can be of any length with whatever cast and whatever. But the appetite from the audience, both of you are launching new podcasts virtually week by week, it feels to me, but certainly every few months. The appetite is there and growing, you think, Kaz, for podcasts, even when they're covering ground. For instance, there are many news podcasts in the world today.
100%. I think as much, I know later on we might speak about data sets and what goes into building those fan bases and those communities. However, I really think at the end of the day it comes down to human connection. I think that's why it's growing so quickly, and that's why these communities are so deeply engaged in these podcasts. Because I think it's finding the right voices to tell the stories they're wanting to hear. So depending on news, entertainment, whatever the genre might be, it's finding those voices that really resonate with the audience you're trying to hit, and they just build a relationship, and it's really exciting.
When we spoke ahead of this event, Kaz, you talked about a blueprint for podcasts, and that you pretty much nailed that blueprint now. You talked about testing everything and how so much was data driven. Just explain what you were meaning by that.
Yeah, so at FlightStory, FlightStory came from the Diary of a CEO. So first came the Diary of a CEO. Everyone knows Stephen Bartlett is an absolute, when I say the blueprint, he has built the blueprint for how every other show at our company is now built and grown, and growth. And that blueprint essentially came from 5 years and longer of testing hundreds, if not thousands, of thumbnails. Everything is tested. Titles, guests are put out in A/B testing. Everything is considered. I can't even really list off everything that's tested, because it truly is every single element of the show. every time, every episode. It's not quarterly, it's not annually, it's every single episode, so that everything we choose, like I said, from titles, thumbnails, episode descriptions, everything we know we're going into with the highest level of whether it be click-through rate or whatever that comes through, with YouTube being our primary platform. We know that the choices we've made, there's evidentiary support to allow us to know that the most reach is going to come from those decisions.
That's the incredible thing, Al. In your broadcast time, you were flying blind up to a point. I mean, you'd have a good idea of what was going to work for your audience. You could tell from emails coming in, texts coming in, stuff being retweeted, anything. But suddenly now you have the power to know not just how many people are listening to any one episode, but how many have made it through to the end of a particular episode. There is so much data that you can learn from.
Absolutely. And at Global, we have Captivate, which is our system where we host our podcasts. So we have our own sort of data dashboard, and then we utilize the Apples, the Spotifys, the sort of gateway to really broad podcast success to see what we can gather. I mean, listen-through rates are great to know. I love looking at those, especially when you get a listen-through rate for an episode of, say, The Newsagents, which is at 125%. Which means people are listening, then going back and listening to more.
So they've listened to the whole thing and then they want some more of it.
They want some more.
Oh, wow.
But if we see, God forbid, a 95% completion rate, we're going, well, how can we be better? How can we do better? What's lost a listener at that point? So we're looking at every stage hourly. I've got the app on my phone, and I'm just resisting checking it even now for our launches the last few weeks, because we love seeing numbers. We love seeing, the age, the location, the qualitative data as well, that we can gather through our focus grouping and polls we can do, and our insights team. Yeah, they give us a really rounded picture of, I guess, that old sort of radio cliche, the avatar of a listener.
I think that's really interesting what you're saying about knowing age, location, all of these data sets of who the audience are. And I think that's what's so valuable to whether it be brands and partners and people who are looking at the podcast world, not knowing how they fit into it and how they can work alongside it, is we know exactly who our audience are, and that is how we can best align with partners and clients and brands to know that if you partner with us, we know exactly who this is going to. We know them almost by name. They're so heavily engaged in our audiences, and every show has their own audience, but we know exactly who they are, what they need to hear. And I mean, every week when we have an episode review of whatever just went out, it's every time we're changing, we're evolving, we're making sure that, okay, this didn't land, why is that? Who's our audience? That doesn't make sense for the stage of life that they're on. Say, like Davina McCall, we mainly target midlifers as our core audience. So we're not going to talk about, leaving uni for the first time, because although we have a small percentage of those younger listeners, that's not our core audience. So any brands that are working with uni freshers weeks or moving out of home for the first time, that's not valuable to your brand. So those key insights of who is your audience is like enormously valuable, and if in fact probably the most important thing to know.
Absolutely, because for example, we know that Danny Dyer's audience, the Live and Let Dyer's audience for our podcast, love sausage rolls. So we've just done a brilliant Greg's 360 campaign with video ads, spot ads, host reads, having some fun with the concept as well. So,
just give us an idea, Kaz, with Diary of a CEO, we were talking about the audience figures. I mean, you were highlighting to me that aside from Joe Rogan, Diary of a CEO globally is number 2 in the world.
Not for long.
Number 2 right now. But I mean, when I was looking at some of the stats for Diary of a CEO, 300,000 to 500,000 new subscribers each month. I mean, that's the equivalent of many regional radio stations coming to you monthly. 50 million monthly listeners, and the millions that you're talking about here, it's staggering.
Yeah, it's actually fairly incomprehensible. Even for someone who works so closely with the DOAC team. I mean, they're just...
Is that what you call them, the DOAC team?
DOAC,
Diary of a CEO. Oh, right,
you're in the know now.
The new acronyms we're learning.
I work so closely with the the handful of, there's actually no word for how, expert doesn't cut it. Like they live and breathe this show. They know exactly, they know Stephen probably better than he knows himself. They know the audience better than they know themselves. And they're just, I've never seen a team act so quickly on changes and we call 1%, the level ups, like the little things that just change the episode. They evolve the episode ever so slightly each time. And I genuinely think it's those 1%, it's those little moments and little additions consistently is what is just driving people back and back and back every time.
Al, for Global, I often think, as much because of my own sort of viewing pleasure, sort of the news agents it plays incredibly big. And the thing that emphasised to me that broadcasters were embracing podcasting was when the cast of the news agents were being signed up, and you saw people, John Sopel and Emily Maitlis. I mean, Emily Maitlis was riding high after her Prince Andrew interview, and she virtually could have said whichever programme she wanted at the BBC, and she could have been doing it. And yet off she went and joined Global and news agents. Quite a vote of confidence.
Absolutely, we keep seeing it happen. And the messages in my inbox from people who are broadcasters currently and want to move into podcasts is numerous. So it's just trying to work on good formats and trying to work out who their audience could be. But no, I think, we heard a lot about when they moved over to the news agents and Global, they wanted freedom. And I think that's absolutely pervasive in everything they've done. Editorial, but and they can say whatever they want.
Yeah.
And they can make bigger impacts, I think, with Global. I mean, our listenership, we're talking millions, which is great. We can be immediate, we can be there, we can do these emergency episodes. And they can indulge in their interests, their passions, follow the stories they want to follow. But the standard of journalism is super, super high, and we can be really reactive and reflexive with it.
I mean, in essence, it's the ultimate way to launch a podcast is to take the world of broadcast and use broadcasters who are very well recognised. And you've got some of the highest profile people there, and Stephen, the same with Diary of a CEO. Do you find that promotion of something new in the world of podcasting benefits from some broadcast coverage and promotion that way? It's not a zero-sum game, podcasts, broadcast, radio. I think, we think of podcasts as an ecosystem, a multimedia ecosystem. And, a podcast is a landing page. It's not just an audio file anymore. It's a landing page for the video podcast, the audio, the multimedia channels, the Discord server where the audience chat, the newsletter, the communities that pop up online. And then at Global, obviously, with our 7 radio stations, radio brands, which reach, I think we're on 50 million people a week. Like, we need to make sure that we're utilising that, pulling the levers that we can pull at Global to work with our podcasts. Because we know, a listener to, the Crisis Room or the Crime Agents that we've just launched, they're going to like LBC and vice versa. Or those who like LBC will like this. So we'd be silly not to pull those levers and work with the broadcasters as much as we can. All right, let's talk through a few of the other podcasts that you guys work on. You've given a shout out to the Crime Agents. Talk us through that, because Crime Agents, Crisis Room, both of them are relatively new, one particularly new.
Yes, the Crime Agents just this week launched with Andy Hughes, an investigative journalist, and Neil Basu, very high up in the Met, and counter-terrorism formerly. And it started off with a doorstepping investigation of a well-known terror suspect, which was exciting and daunting and a good challenge for the lawyers. But the crime agents will be, they'll be taking the stories that matter. They'll be taking the crime angle. They'll be explaining, why is crime happening before our very eyes everywhere we go? Why is there this mood of increasing, worry? And taking on those big cases from the recent past as well. The Crisis Room, we're kind of echoing a Cobra committee here with Amber Rudd, former Home Secretary. We've got Mark Urban, former Newsnight. And Mark,
a spy as well.
And a spy. And, yes, well, allegedly. And Mark Polymeropoulos, who is former Secret Service in the US. They're all dealing with crises. They're all dealing with what we're all thinking about now, but taking a different angle. And we hope at Global, through our news diet that we can offer, you can cover off every angle in a really entertaining and accessible way.
And Kaz, away from Diary of a CEO, I know that you've got a couple of podcasts, again, relatively new. You've got Davina McCall doing one now. Talk us through that one.
Yeah, so Begin Again with Davina McCall is just the happiest place on earth. Like, Disneyland has nothing on us. It's all about, we aim mainly towards midlife, but honestly, everybody can take something away from the conversations, rather than, like, regardless of if they're specifically speaking about a midlife experience. However, it's what we try to do is either inform, encourage, or empower our audience to take something away and improve their life in some sort of a way, or just walk away with a feeling of hope or inspiration through our kind of more celebrity life stories. So the kinds of conversations Davina would have with her guests is we have kind of 3 pillars that we put them under, and it's visionaries, trailblazers, and change makers. So our visionaries are our celebrity guests who have something really special to tell, like we had Richard E. Grant, who spoke so beautifully about his late wife and the love they had and their story together, and that resonated so massively with our audience. I think being of that kind of midlife age range and above, it's losing your partner is something a lot of people start to consider and start to imagine, and sometimes live far younger than they should. And him speaking so honestly and so candidly about that experience and how much pride and love he has for her just hit home so much, which is just one example. And then when we go to trailblazers and change makers, it's our expert guests who have, you know, an insane level of expertise to be able to help empower our audience to elevate their lives, that whether that through hormonal changes that come with midlife in women, and making changes to your brain health and get gut health for longevity. It could be lots of different things. Like, the world's kind of our oyster. And our change makers tend to be guests who kind of fit into both categories. Like, they may have a profile, they're be an expert in their area, but a great example of this was a recent episode with Chi Heng Yi, who's a Shaolin monk, who is just, the conversation was just so much about finding peace in life and finding peace in situations. And I think we cover a very broad spectrum of conversations. Oh, you'll love it. Yeah. A very broad spectrum of conversation, but as I said, it always comes down to either empowering, inspiring, or informing.
Paul C. Brunson's podcast, again, weekly. Davina's is weekly,
yes,
I think.
Both weekly.
We Need to Talk.
Yes.
And there's a place for experts, familiar faces, but relationships very much the focus.
Absolutely, and it's kind of ever evolving. So Paul, with his background, he's a relationship expert himself. Like, a lot of people will know him from Married at First Sight UK and Celebs Go Dating. So his background is being a relationship expert. So he definitely can lend a hand in navigating everything that comes with relationships, whether that be marriage, divorce, breakup. So with Paul comes a lot of celebrity life stories. We're very, very grateful that our guests feel such an amount of safety with all of our hosts, but especially with Paul in this context, because a lot of the time they're opening up about very personal situations for the first time on a public level. And I cannot stress enough how they're in the safest of hands with Paul. Even yesterday, I obviously can't say who, but we had a recording yesterday with a high-profile person in the industry who was opening up about an extremely difficult relationship she had in the past for the first time in detail. And it was incredibly powerful. The whole team were kind of in shock at how powerful that conversation was. But afterwards, kind of off camera, we had a discussion with her, and she was just like, you know, when I started to think about telling my story, this was the first place I thought of. I knew I was safe with Paul. I knew he had a respect for me and my story. And although this is being put on a public platform, we make the experience as intimate as physically possible. Like, in terms of guest production, our team are so passionate about, I mentioned before, the 1%. My goal always is for our guests to feel as safe and comfortable and protected as possible with our experience.
How important do you think it is for guests and experts that you're speaking to that this is a pre-recorded interview of, you know, ill-defined length? It can be longer, shorter, or whatever. There can be some editing done, etc. How important do you think that is for guests? You first, Kaz.
For
guests, rather than going live on the radio and talking about a very difficult relationship breakup, for example.
Well,
here is a pre-recorded
Yeah.
thing where you maybe have listened to many podcasts before, podcast editions before, and somebody feels, okay, that podcast is one I can speak to,
Yeah.
but I know I can breathe, I'm not live.
Yeah. Well, I think that it allows them to be a little bit more unfiltered in a way that it feels like we're just sitting down having a conversation here. Like, especially in those situations with Paul, and same for Davina, we have a lot of stories around grief and loss, which is obviously incredibly difficult to talk about. And I suppose what we do is from the start, from the very, very beginning of communications with the guest and their talent teams, it's creating that relationship, that level of intimacy from the second they step through the door. We have music playing, we have candles lit. It's a very safe and warm environment for you to walk into, because we have to respect too, especially with our nature of podcasts being like celebrity life stories mainly. It's their lives. It's, they're not reporting on a current event that they don't have a personal connection to. They're not reporting on, or they're not sharing expertise. Obviously, yes, with our expert guests, that is happening. But in the case of Paul's life stories and relationship stories, we're asking, it's a big ask, we always say. It's a big ask to have someone sit down on a public level and share what's going on in their own personal lives. So the comfortability and safety we can provide is like key. And to kind of mention your point about the kind of pre-recording of it, it allows, I think, for a more naturally flowing conversation. Like even with Paul, like we've had 5-hour records that get cut down to
5 hours?
Yeah, we've gone for 5 hours before. It's rare, but it happens. But even like Paul's on average records for about 3 hours. Every episode it records for about 3 hours.
And the average length of what we listen to as an audience would be?
Usually around an hour and a half or hour 45, I want to say, for Paul, and Davina maybe slightly shorter.
For the audience?
Yeah, 100%.
To dedicate, a movie length.
Yeah,
to the duration.
feature film.
Yeah.
No, it's, yeah.
Al, one of the benefits of podcasting, of course, is podcasts can be recorded, not necessarily to schedule. You can pump one out pretty quickly if one needs to be recorded. How much of that do you think appeals to contributors? That actually, a call from the newsagents team, for example, we're doing something and we've really rated you from a previous edition, we need to do one now.
Hugely, in terms of being able to time shift and bank episodes. Yeah, I mean, the great thing about podcasting is its flexibility in the production process as well. And we like to have a stack of evergreen episodes ready to go for almost any podcast that we have on our slate of nearly 50.
Plenty in the can.
50 podcasts, yeah, plenty in the can. And then we can be really, really reactive when we need that sort of last minute hell for leather interview. Our producers love creating networks of great contacts, great guests, great agencies, whatever it might be, that they can call on in these moments. And it's really important for our producers to have those, because it's everything. It's who you reach out to in those times of need. It inspires you with new ideas for podcasts and episodes, and it makes their job a lot easier. And also enables them to boast internally, hey guys, look, I've got all these great contacts, I've got all these great agencies that I know. Well, let me share the wealth.
We're getting a whole pile of questions flowing through for you both, and it's actually half an hour has flown by already. We are about to put up a poll on the screen for you, looking really ahead to future events such as these, whatever you want to watch in future, questions we might ask, guests we might have. If you let us know, answer the questions in this poll, that will help us enormously. Among the questions here we're getting from our live audience, and we start off actually with that one. Al, you've kind of led into this really. What advice do you have for PRs when approaching you with guests? And I appreciate for both of you, not every podcast you work on has lots and lots of guests. Some are echo chambers more for regular contributors. But what does a PR need to be thinking about when approaching you with a guest?
Sure. Shall I kick off?
Please.
Yeah. So in terms of our guest-based podcasts, we do still have a few, and they do really well. So we have, just to lay the groundwork, we have sort of our niche interests, our communities sort of based podcasts, let's call them. You're Wrong About ADHD. We just launched one with Vanessa Feltz, Help My Child's Anxious. James O'Brien's Full Disclosure, obviously interviewing big starry names. And then our news catalogue as well, which we're always looking for voices who can speak to whatever's happening. In terms of approaching, what's the best way to approach?
Best way, but also timing, because of course, for a PR agency, they don't know when you record, and of course you can record in bits and bobs and dribs and drabs and then pull it all together in the final edit. So it's quite a hard nut to crack from the outside, it looks like anyway.
Definitely, I think that's why striking up a relationship with a producer is just a really great thing to be able to do. The producers like it, and it benefits everybody, because each podcast is different. You know, some will be recorded on a Tuesday, put out on a Thursday. Some are recorded Monday, put out Tuesday. Some are recorded in February and put out in April. So it really does vary. Literally asking producers or execs or people like me, how does this one work? We'll tell you. Like, we've got a vested interest in doing that. Obviously, the earlier the better for things that can have lead time, but also don't be afraid of those last minute, what about this person? And if those approaches are really bespoke and friendly and to the point, less is always more, then you're going to prick up a producer's ears and really help them out, because they're so busy that they appreciate the help.
I can only imagine in a Trumpian world as we're in 2025 that the news agents have probably pumped out quite a few emergency podcasts,
yes,
last minute podcasts. It's quite something, the news cycle at the moment. So if somebody has expertise, say from the charity sector or the academic sector or whatever, it's worth just saying, look, here is a potentially great voice for the news agents, because let's face it, even if you're talking about it today, you might be talking about it in 3 weeks' time as well.
Absolutely. And, we as a team, we've got a team of 11 senior producers, 4 execs. We talk to each other. So we share the wealth. If someone's come in with a great contact that's not quite right for this thing, we're going to be spreading that around the podcast team and a slate of nearly 50 podcasts. So I think that's really, really worth doing. 50
podcasts is the slate at the moment, is it? That's staggering.
We make in-house, yeah.
Are you listening to LBC? You're all there in the global tower. I kind of picture you there. Are you listening to LBC and think that would be a great voice for that particular podcast? I mean, does that sort of cross-pollination happen between broadcast and podcast as well?
Yes, and we want to encourage that more. Obviously, our producers, they're amazing, but they've always got their head in an edit or a prep, or they're managing the talent, or they're doing something else. So it's difficult to be across everything in the building, but we are developing more and more so that sort of cross-pollination. LBC make their podcasts, we enable them to do that. They're always in need of guests. So this is definitely a work in progress, but it's something we want to do.
So once you're on and doing well, you might end up on half a dozen podcasts over the next year or so. I mean, it's staggering what you can build into. Kaz, your thoughts there. How to reach out to you, when to reach out to you. Of course, so much depends on the individual podcast. And my suggestion would be that anyone who's wanting to connect in with what you guys are doing needs to probably listen to some of the editions of the podcast to get a really good idea of what you need.
100%. So I want to shadow so much of what Al said. We really take a similar approach in terms of timing, and those relationships are crucial. So definitely, like, even if you're not in a promo cycle for whatever talent you're working with, it's always worth to spark up those conversations and build those relationships, because they are so valuable down the line. When those things come up last minute or whatever happens, you already have that relationship built. So please reach out anytime. But yes, sorry, remind me the second part of that question.
Essentially, the best way to be approaching you, what do you want to see on an email?
Yes.
My suggestion is always keep it short, because you guys are putting together a lot of work for a lot of podcasts.
Yes, sorry, I remember what I was going to say. You mentioned kind of going back into the back catalogue and watching a few episodes. When I'm doing outreach to PR teams or talent teams about guests we're particularly interested in, I'm always curating, I suppose, the examples of episodes that I send them, depending on the person I'm outreaching to. So knowing it's someone within their similar field of expertise, or a guest that might be able to speak on similar topics, it gives them a really well-rounded idea of the kinds of conversations we can have and what that might look like for that guest. So definitely, in terms of if you're reaching out to us, it's always worth, I would really recommend going back and you just watching even clips on our social channels will give you a really good idea of the brand and feel of each show. But knowing, kind of having a particular idea of what that guest is keen to talk about. I think that is one of the key differences, I'm sure you'll agree, in terms of guests coming on a long form platform like a podcast instead of a press run on radio promotion or whatever, is yes, we're obviously, of course, able to work with press runs of whether it be book releases, album releases for musicians, film, whatever the case may be, it's optimal for both of us to be able to align with those high promotion times. However, go on.
I was going to say there's a relevant question here on exactly this point. How far are you planning for guests? Ahead are you planning for guests? A campaign might not reach out to TV and radio producers until a couple of weeks before the date. Is that going to be too late for you? A couple of weeks?
Not necessarily. It's very dependent on, of course, like we're working with lots of different schedules in terms of talent schedules, host schedules. It's very dependent, but I would say it's never too late. It's never too late. Always get in touch, because I think you don't want to miss that opportunity too, because you never know. What I would say is never doubt reaching out, because
oh, it rhymes too.
it does, and I realised that as I said
We'll
it.
get that put on the wall for
Thank you. You can quote me. No, don't doubt yourself, because at the same time, what could be going on behind the scenes, we could have had a guest drop out last minute, and all of a sudden that slot is available. So if something comes up with lesser notice, 100% still reach out. But at the same time, if you're planning for a promotion schedule 6 months down the line, still reach out, because it also allows us to create a bigger promotional cycle, a bigger social strategy and press strategy. We can do some special extra content that we wouldn't normally have the time or capacity to do. So there's kind of endless opportunities, but we can make it work depending on your timeline.
I do agree with that, scaling up of the opportunities with the longer lead time, but we can work quickly last minute.
And the germ of an idea might be sent through, and you might not be able to get it into the latest edition of a particular podcast, but it might inspire you to go, actually, that's a really good thought, a really good idea. We should do an edition on that, and then suddenly that guest suggestion might actually have some merit.
Totally, and I do have a very relevant example of that. I have to be very careful about what I say, but on that note, we've had examples in the past of we're either not able to make timings align between talent and host or production timelines, but we know that voice is very relevant and they carry a very important, or a conversation we're really keen to platform, and there are always ever-growing opportunities for wider discussions that, although it might not be in the format I'm being really careful here. Although you might not be in the format you're familiar with right now, there will be opportunities down the line to kind of have a different approach that guest can come back. If it doesn't work right now, it'll work down the line for something else.
Another question here. Do you ever reject pitches because they feel perhaps too safe or too generic? Really, what makes a pitch stand out from the hundreds you receive? Al first.
Short answer, yes. Long answer, but with a pitch that feels too safe, it's always nice if you have done a bit of the thinking for the producer anyway. So if you start that thought process off, a producer looking at so many emails in a day, thinking about so many different things, when they read an email and they get a little taster of what it could be, and someone, as you've been saying, Kaz, sort of knows the podcast, knows sort of what we're after. Don't be afraid of suggesting treatments and topics and things like that. No one will be offended if they go, why don't you do an episode on this? And you could do it like that, because the producer will take that and use their expertise to shape that into something that could work. So, yeah.
One for you, Kaz, here. Talking about Paul C. Brunson's podcast,
yes.
The relationship one. Do you feel that Paul's podcast is reaching out to a younger audience through the guests that they have on?
So I suppose one kind of informs the other. So it's not that when we kind of launch a show, we'll have an idea of who the audience is. I suppose in Paul's case, when that show first launched, I wasn't on the team at the time, but I would imagine the thought that goes into that is who is his community already? So coming from shows like Married at First Sight and Celebs Go Dating, very topical in pop culture. They're in the front of our screens on our major TV channels and on streaming services. They're available on demand. So it's thinking about the types of people that are accessing those shows. I respect as well that on a television format, that demo will be even wider. But for us, I think it started off with those first few episodes. And like I said, we test everything. Everything is experimentation. We have a dedicated experimentation team whose entire existence is basically to try new things and fail, and then try again and fail again. But at least every failure is a learning. And that is really how we keep finding deeper and deeper access into who that person is. So to kind of answer that question more particularly, yes and no. We know who our audience is, and for Paul in particular, the core demographic is 24 to 35. So it's worth keeping in mind for brands and partners and guests that if their audience is aligned with that core audience, I mean, the optimal promotion is just like...
And that's so useful for PR if they're commissioning some research, for example.
Yeah.
If they frankly know that, you know, that particular program is a target, a dream to appear on, well, commission your research among that sort of audience profile. You're already one step forward there.
Totally, and like Al said about kind of doing a little bit of the producer's work for them in the first place. If especially with PR teams working with talent, if you know your talent really well, I think that's such a key insight as well, is that I've found that working with PRs that know their talent super, super well and have that really intimate connection and that really intimate relationship, it means that, first of all, there's more trust in their teams to come to the right places. So those talent are trusting these teams to come to the right places to tell their story. So the better you can know your talent, the better, because also you'll have a greater insight on how their story can fit on one of our platforms. But 100% having a good idea of who that audience is, and also we don't gatekeep that information. So if you are reaching out and we send over our deck, all of that information is there for you in terms of demographic, age, range, locations,
Perfect
interests.
answer to this question. What kind of data can you share with brands? Sometimes it's restricted, but actually there's a lot you guys can actually say. If a PR reaches out going, look, we're working on this project, what do you want?
Totally. So, I mean, in terms of what we give on a first instance, we can always go back and dive deeper if needed. We always have like our up-to-date listening figures. Obviously, they're the kind of headlines. But in terms of YouTube impressions, solo, TikTok, Instagram, depending on where we're kind of hitting, we'll always have up-to-date impression figures and data that way. And yeah, we'll be able to tell you demographics. We'll be able to give you an idea of who exactly we are speaking to, who our community is. And I think the most gorgeous thing about having that link up with social media and having these podcasts so prevalent on socials is we speak to our audience every day. Like, we know them so well. So even just having a scan through the comments on some of the clips of the shows, it gives you a really good idea of who that audience is. And we often ask our audience, who do you want to see? Like, what are you invested in? What are you interested in? And you'll literally see who they're at, whose stories they want to hear. So that's really helpful for PRs too, is to go through and see.
Talking through previously mentioned data that we were talking about, how do you know that the Dyers podcast listeners like sausage rolls? How on earth do you have that data?
Well, maybe I was being a bit glib with the sausage rolls comment. I think
that might be in comments. An explosion around something that they were talking about.
I mean, Danny's really open about his interests and what he likes and what he doesn't like, and they're always talking about food. And also, as you were saying, Kaz, we see those comments, we see that feedback from the listeners. You know, we know that they've talked about Greggs before, for example. Like, we know that they like Greggs, and I like Greggs. And the campaign was really effective because it was all to win sausage rolls.
Other bakers are available.
Yeah, other bakers are available.
It's not a sponsored event.
It feels to me like we are talking about slightly different audiences in one sense, in that I think you are aiming very often for a primarily UK audience. I'm sensing for yourselves that global outreach is happening, and I think global is going to be happening. You're going to be flirting with America, both of you. Kaz first is through Diary of a CEO. We've talked about its global reach.
Yeah.
Is everything that you're really working towards aiming towards a global rather than just a UK audience?
100%. So, I mean, really good examples of that recently is we actually had a double hitter with Mel Robbins. So Mel Robbins came on both of our extended shows. She's already done 2 appearances on Diary of a CEO previously, so that's already standing there. She's now hit the trifecta, so we're just going to sign her to the company soon. I'm joking, Mel, if you're listening, you're not. But yeah, so I mean, that's a really good example of, for someone who has such an invested US audience, we're definitely pulling those in where possible. Another example is we have a couple of actually Australian guests coming up on Davina's show in the next couple of weeks. One's next week. And that will be pulling in that audience too, because also it's a good point too on the data. We're always keeping an eye on where our audience are, and sometimes like you'll be so surprised. Some random episodes that you wouldn't think would pull in a certain community from a certain country do.
Yeah.
And it's very surprising, but then that gives us more insight to be like, oh, we have a nice little pocket there of community. Let's look at what conversations and what topics and what guests we can give to them, because we know that they're there now. So we're constantly keeping an eye on that, but 100% global takeover is the goal.
Al, you concur to quite UK orientated at the moment, but things are just getting bigger and more global almost by the day.
Absolutely, we're really interested in what we can do in the US, and already we've seen with Christiane Amanpour presents The X-Files,
So cool.
with her ex-husband Jamie Rubin, who was former State Department for Biden and Clinton. She's the biggest journalistic name in the USA, so sign her up. And we already see 60% of her listeners are US based.
Yeah.
It's you know, that's easy to tell and easy to see that how that will pan out. Also, we did a really nice 7-parter on Vine, the app Vine, the rise and fall, the backstabbing,
Oh, wow.
the explosions, the gossip behind the scenes. Really, really good bespoke series, which has flown in the US as well and in Australia. So we are seeing an angling content for the US, and it's piquing interest. We're also working with iHeart now. We formed a nice partnership for some cross collaboration, which is just doing wonders for that.
Are you only interested, and I guess the answer to this question via Zoom is maybe depends on the individual podcast, but are you guys only interested in famous or high profile people as guests, or is it sometimes, you know, somebody off the street but with an amazing story to tell? Kaz first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I would never say something's off the table, ever, because at the end of the day, what's the most important thing to us as a team is that we're bringing the most desired and most impactful conversations to our podcast. So especially for a show like Davina, we've had guests in the past that wouldn't have had the biggest profiles, but their story was prolific and it was just so engaging for our audience. It was so impactful. So I would say that, yes, of course, in terms of when we're talking numbers and we're talking cross-promotion, those following bases are extremely helpful, and a lot of the time they are the types of guests that we have. However, what's more important to me over everything else is the substance of the conversation, and how that's going to land with our listeners, because I'm not interested in a surface level kind of, you know, cross-promotion, easy in and out job. Like, we want true conversation. And it's incredibly important not only to our production team, but to our hosts. Like, it's at the end of the day, they have to feel emotionally charged and invested and compelled to have these conversations. And sometimes that will be with someone without a following, because the story is just so important and so impactful.
Al, your thoughts there on fame being very appealing? You're putting on somebody who's very much recognisable as opposed to somebody maybe not as famous but has a great story or experience to talk about.
I would concur with everything Kaz says. I think that's our approach as well. Obviously, it's horses for courses in terms of our different podcasts, but a great story is a great story, and a great speaker is a great speaker. It's the speaker's ability to go deeper, to, you know, depending on the tone of it, play along. You know, it's a podcast. It's more relaxed. It's more in depth. It can get more intimate than other forms of media. So it's whether they're a good podcast voice, which I think it is sometimes different to a radio voice, and obviously to a TV voice.
In what way? What makes a good podcast voice as opposed to a radio voice?
I mean, coming from radio news, when you have short hits, or, you know, you want that person to deliver the goods and get out of there.
Yeah. Have something to say on the issue of the day and then get gone. Yeah.
Exactly. I think with a podcast, if they're sort of the Amazon delivery guy, the podcast is the Amazon delivery guy coming in for a cup of tea, and you get to know him or her a bit more. So to torture that metaphor no more, I think... thanks. I think it's the right person for the job. Global loves big shiny names, obviously, but for our podcasts, you know, the one about ADHD in adulthood, or the one about anxiety, or Dirty Mother Pucker about, you know, parenting. Good story is a good story.
Are you surprised, data that we actually compiled towards the end of last year, over 70% of PR professionals we found reported to us that they did not have any sort of a podcast strategy at all. Are you surprised by that?
Yeah, I really am.
Quite astonished.
Yeah, I really am. I think even outside of entertainment, I just think when you sit down and think about where these massive cultural moments are like, what is the epicenter of these huge cultural moments? I think we're seeing time and time and time again, it's podcast, whether that be here in the UK or shows in the US, like Call Her Daddy, like a massive part of Kamala Harris's campaign was that interview, which is an entertainment-based podcast. She's not a political figure. She doesn't have a journalistic background. It's an entertainment-based podcast, but they made that, like the White House made that part of their strategy for election. And I think, I mean, that's a huge example of something I have absolutely nothing to do with, but at the same time, shows the impact and the global scale of these opportunities. And I believe, personally, I don't have necessarily the data to back this up, but from my own heart of hearts, I believe, like I said at the start of the conversation, it comes back down to human connection. Like we can have all the technology and all the data and all the strategies in the world, but at the end of the day, watching two people, or two or more, depending on your show, sit down and have a conversation as people is the most impactful. I think especially in terms of celebrity life stories or whatever it is, it's humanizing those people a little bit more. I've kind of found with radio, as much as I loved it, sometimes you get these big stars in and they're the most gorgeous people, but they only get 2 minutes on air, 5 minutes max, to kind of plug whatever they have to plug and off they go to do the next thing. Whereas, like Al said, we're sitting down and having a cup of tea with them. You're getting to know these people on a far more intimate level than you ever have before. So I think in terms of, especially for PR teams, the more you can build your community, like it's insurmountable how important that is.
Amazingly, time has reached a point where I need to be wrapping this up. A final question for you. I sit in this chair a lot making podcasts. We make a lot of podcasts here for various clients, various organizations. My advice to the people sat there is just be you, be authentic and be real.
Yeah.
If you were to offer advice for somebody who's watching this and they're going to pitch somebody to you or whatever, and they're then advising this great guest for you, what's the number one bit of advice, Al first, that you would offer somebody about to appear on a podcast?
I'd say be authentic is a given, right?
Yeah.
We're doing that, taking that as a baseline. I'd say make sure you prepare, and that does mean listening, and that does mean
previous editions of the podcast. Listen to previous editions of that podcast,
and ask the questions you need to of the producer or the exec or whoever your touch point person is, so you can make sure that your client, your guest, is going in fully prepared, fully in the know, and isn't treating it like it's a radio interview and then being surprised when they get an extra 18 minutes or they ask the question that they absolutely weren't prepared for. It's being prepared to play along with that podcast and obviously be yourself.
Knowing the style of that, the format of that podcast.
Yeah.
Kaz, your thoughts?
Totally agree. I don't have too much else to add to that, but 100% we would always recommend going back and watching through a couple of episodes just to, like you said, understand the format, understand the tone, and it also helps, I think, guests be a little bit more at ease as well. I think then when they come to set, it feels familiar. They've seen it before. They understand what's happening. So definitely familiarizing yourself as much as possible, and knowing too that we have a personal investment in you and your story, and we want to platform that. We're not just here for, it's not surface level, like I said. We want you to open up. We want you to be yourself. So don't fear being, like we said, authentically yourself. Don't think I just need to go in and talk about this book that I've written and everything needs to link back to the book. Go off. Tell me about your favorite food. Tell me about the best holiday you've ever had. Like, I want to know.
We've got the time.
Yeah, we've got the time. Yeah. We've got 5 hours
We're not
sometimes.
approaching a news bulletin here.
Exactly. Yeah. We've got the time, and we want to know those things because that's sometimes more important to our community.
We're all the same team, right?
Yeah.
There's no, it's not a head-to-head.
And a participant, somebody taking part in an edition, whether they're contributing online or actually in your studios, and are we really talking about video recordings? Even if it's going to be listened to by an audience, you guys are gathering these things in vision now, virtually universally?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I know you guys have sort of led the way with a lot of that.
Yeah.
We're pushing further and further into video. It is the future of podcasting, and I'm trying to campaign to ban the word vodcast. I think it sounds
Terrible.
outdated before it's even become a thing.
Let's just not do that.
Let's just not do it. So let's all ignore that. But yeah, we film in our bespoke podcast studios, or if the setup's better in someone's home and their lounge setup like this, we'll
And
film
some
everything.
people dial in via Zoom as audiences are watching now, but it is possible to contribute that way?
Absolutely, yeah. We use Riverside, it's great. We're really used to turning those clips around, turning full-length video episodes around. Yeah, InVision is the way forward. It offers something different for the listener.
Yeah, and for any PR teams that have worked, if podcast is a new area for you, but you've worked a lot in kind of telly and daytime or anything like that, I would kind of equate our setup now to just little mini telly sets. So it would be very similar to what you've done before. It's not as scary as you think. It's not this whole new monster that you've no idea how it works. At the same time, it's very similar to things you've done before.
Al, Kaz, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today. We've learned so much. Our next event is already speeding towards us. My colleague Ashley Carroll will be focusing on Christmas. Yes, it's not that far away. And what you need to do to prepare to secure some broadcast coverage and interviews in and around the festive season. Look out for details of that one. We'll email you them. It should be around the end of July, very early August. Heart Breakfast creative producer Pete May will be alongside Ashley for that one. In the meantime, thanks very much for watching.